Ask yourself, what would policing in America look like if there were no black people here? You know, this question had me intrigued because, I think about some of the cases and court cases that have been substantiated to give police authority in America. And at the heart of most of the cases, there's a black person. And, if you go back to Plessy Ferguson, Matt versus Ohio, if you look at Terry versus Ohio, Connor versus Graham, usually when police authority is expanded, it's because of an African American, black person, when police are either violating their rights or using force or wanting to do something that was not previously lawful. If you look at the case of Terry as a perfect example, Terry gave rise to the simple frisk, instant apprehension, where a police officer can pat you down in order to determine. But if you go back to the Terry case, and you'll find that with Terry is so interesting because the police officer even said that I'm following this individual because I don't like how he looks. Pretextually creating interactionalism. One of the things that I like to think about is when it comes to policing, that we've allowed people's actions to dictate policy and their bias to become policy. For example, a reasonable officer. So back when Terry was doing his thing, and the officer had been officer for 40 years, this is 1963, we have to understand that a reasonable officer would have probably been racist in the 60s. That's just, you can debate that, but a reasonable officer would have been, because what happens is that statistically, there were a lot of areas where, let's say, for example, a black person would have not been at because of, housing geographically, a lot of areas that are predominantly white. And so what does this mean if a black person went to that area? By definition, that black person would have been suspicious because this is a predominantly white area. Why is a black person here? That would initiate a police call. That would initiate other actions because it's not reasonable. And the articulate is that there is no black people here. He's either here to rob us, he's either here to do something bad, so we need the police to get out there. So a reasonable officer would think that, yes, it's not a area where you see a lot of black people at. What is this black person doing here? Let me ask him questions. Let me find out what he's doing here pretextually in order to assuage the public fears of this black person in this predominantly white area. We have to talk about that dynamic, and that dynamic is still alive today. Because when it comes to the officer's perception, what is reasonable? Words like reasonable and suspicion, when they're used in the context of policing, will always come back negatively on black people. So in this thought experiment, what would policing look like if there were no black people in America? I think it would be a lot less violent. I think police would not have the justification or jurisdiction or even the mandate to do a lot of the tactics they're using. Pretextual stops, the use of force would definitely be nowhere near where it's at today. These are my thoughts.